Beneath the glittering splendor of the Tudor court behind, the silk tapestries, jeweled crowns, and thunderous proclamations lay. A world shaped by ambition, manipulation, and the relentless hunger for power. King Henry VIII was not merely a monarch. He was a storm that reshaped the very foundations of the British crown. His passion could elevate a family to unimaginable heights or crush a legacy in an instant. His decisions born from desire, insecurity, and destiny changed religion, redefined authority, and left Europe trembling. Many saw him as a tyrant. Others saw him as the necessary architect of a New England. But behind every triumph, every marriage, every execution, lay a shadow, a secret far more complex than the king history remembers. One, the birth of a future storm, 900 to 1,000 words on a cold June morning in 1491. The bells of Greenwich Palace rang softly, their echoes drifting across the River Thames. Inside the palace walls, a child had been born, one who was never meant to rule, never meant to carry the weight of a kingdom, never meant to shape the destiny of a nation. His name was Henry Tudor, the second son of King Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth of York. The court celebrated, but not with the thunderous joy that accompanies the birth of an heir. That honor belonged to his older brother, Arthur, the delicate, thoughtful prince groomed carefully to inherit a kingdom won through blood and rebellion. Henry, in contrast, was expected to remain in the shadows, perhaps a churchman, perhaps a political tool, but never a king. Yet fate had already begun to twist its unseen threads. Henry's childhood was unlike Arthur's. As Arthur was sent to Ludlow to learn statecraft, Henry was raised near his mother, surrounded by music, poetry, fencing masters, foreign tutors, and scholars. He absorbed everything: Latin by age 7, theology by 8, and by 10, he could ride as fearlessly as any knight twice his age. It was bright, charming, and physically gifted, everything a future king should be. But he was not the future king. This imbalance planted a seed deep within him, a hunger to matter, to be seen, to seize what was denied. Years later, that hunger would ignite a storm. The fragile heir, Prince Arthur, in contrast, was quiet and studious, his frail health a constant concern. He trained for kingship, yet his voice rarely carried beyond the council chamber. While Henry dazzled courtiers with athletic prowess and musical talent, Arthur was expected to bear the crown. Their father, Henry VII, was cautious, a king forged by war, suspicion, and the constant threat of rebellion. He trusted few people, but strangely, he trusted Henry's intelligence more than he admitted. He assigned scholars to shape the boy's mind, molding him quietly for a future that neither of them imagined would come. Henry was not raised to rule, but he was raised to understand power. It was an important distinction. Even at 9, Henry could read court accounts. At 10, he could debate philosophy with tutors twice his age. At 11, he demonstrated an uncanny ability to charm ambassadors, who often left court speaking of the delightful young prince with the golden hair Batassa Grey. So too did the shadows around him. The marriage that changed England in 1501, Arthur, now 15, married Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Spain's legendary monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella. It was a union meant to anchor England to one of the greatest powers in Europe. Henry watched from a distance as his brother walked beside his new bride, Catherine, adorned in jewels and Spanish silk. She carried herself like royalty. She spoke like royalty. She was royalty. Henry, very 10, felt something unfamiliar. Admiration mixed with resentment. He envied the responsibilities, the respect, the destiny Arthur possessed simply by being born first. But destiny is fickle. Only 5 months after the wedding, Arthur fell gravely ill. Some said it was sweating sickness. Others whispered curses. Catherine prayed beside his bed, but the young prince faded like morning mist. At 16, he was dead. The kingdom fell silent. The bells tolled. Even the river seemed to slow its current, and in the darkened corridors of the palace, eyes turned slowly, expectantly toward the once-forgotten second son. Henry, boy who should never have been king, now stood one breath away from the throne. A kingdom reshaped overnight, Henry VII was devastated by Arthur's death, but he wasted no time in securing the dynasty's future. The survival of the Tudor line depended on stability on alliances. On Spain. And Spain demanded an answer. What would become of Catherine of Aragon? To the great matter, Henry's break with Rome by the early 1520s, Henry VIII was no longer the cheerful young king England adored. Years of failed pregnancies had drained Catherine. Political pressure was growing. Europe whispered about Henry's lack of a son. The Tudor dynasty, still young and fragile, needed a male heir to survive, and Henry became convinced that God was punishing him. He believed marrying his brother's widow had offended divine law. He repeated one verse from Leviticus constantly. If a man shall take his brother's wife, they shall be childless. Even though he wasn't technically childless, Mary lived. Henry interpreted it as no sons. Catherine disagreed. She swore her first marriage to Arthur was never consummated. Therefore, the marriage to Henry was valid. But by then, Henry wasn't listening. His mind had already begun to drift toward a different solution and a different woman. And Boleyn enters the story. And Boleyn, clever, stylish, mysterious, and much younger than Catherine, stepped into Henry's life like a spark landing on dry straw. She refused to be his mistress. She refused to be another woman in the shadows. She wanted marriage or nothing. Henry became obsessed. He wrote her long love letters, promising he would change the world for her. He truly believed she was the key to a future sunant, a new beginning for England. The problem was simple. The Pope would not allow the divorce. Catherine's nephew was the powerful Emperor Charles V, the most influential ruler in Europe. The Pope was practically under his control. Approving Henry's divorce would anger the Emperor, and the Pope wasn't willing to risk it. Henry waited 4 years. Nothing changed. So Henry made a decision that would shake Europe. If Rome refused him, he would no longer answer to Rome. The king versus the church. Henry turned to the one man who always solved problems, Cardinal Wolsey. Wolsey tried everything. He pushed for meetings, hearings, papal courts. He even tried loopholes and political pressure. But Catherine fought with dignity and intelligence. She stood before judges, lifted her hands, and said, "I have been your true wife, and God is my witness." The people supported her. Europe supported her. The church supported her. Henry grew frustrated, then furious. He blamed Wolsey. By 1529, Wolsey fell from power, stripped of his titles, and died on his way to trial. His last words were tragic. "If I had served God as diligently as I served the king." Henry moved on. He made a new advisor, Rhys Thomas, Cromwell, a ruthless and brilliant mind. Cromwell understood Henry's desire and saw an opportunity. Told Henry, "You do not need Rome. Make yourself the head of the church." This idea was explosive, dangerous, revolutionary. But Henry listened. When Henry VIII married Anne Boleyn, he saw a bright new future. He dreamed of a son, a secure dynasty, and an England reborn. But Anne wasn't a quiet queen. She was fiery, opinionated, and refused to be a shadow. At first, Henry loved it. Soon, he was exhausted by it. The real pressure mounted when Anne gave him a daughter, Elizabeth, but not the son he desperately needed. After several heartbreaking miscarriages, Henry's patience wore thin. Whispers filled the court as another woman, the gentle Jane Seymour, caught the king's eye. Anne's powerful enemies, led by the calculating Thomas Cromwell, saw their chance. Cromwell, once her ally, now saw her as an obstacle. He wove a web of shocking lies, adultery, conspiracy, even witchcraft. Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower, her trial a mere formality. On May 19, 1536, she faced her end with incredible dignity, forgiving her enemies and remaining loyal to the king who condemned her. For the Tudors and the terror of prophecy, by the time the Tudor dynasty rose to power, Prophecy had woven itself so deeply into the royal consciousness that it shaped almost every major decision. This was an age defined by fear, ambition, and insecurity, and no Tudor monarch embodied this tension more vividly than Henry VIII. His reign, already turbulent with political upheaval and personal conflict, became a stage where prophecy and power collided in dangerous ways. Henry VIII grew up hearing whispers that his destiny would either elevate England to greatness or plunge it into chaos. One particular prophecy, circulating quietly among scholars and courtiers, foretold that a king born under the lion shall reshape the crown through blood and union. Henry, born in June under the zodiac sign of Gemini, but close to Leo, believed this message hinted at his own rule. It gave him a sense of divine mission, reinforcing his belief that he was chosen to secure the Tudor line and strengthen England's global position. However, Henry's life soon became dominated by one prophetic fear: the looming threat of a dynasty without a male heir. At the time, astrologers warned him that a queen ruling alone would bring turmoil, civil unrest, and the collapse of the monarchy. Whether this prediction was rooted in politics or superstition mattered little. Henry took it as truth. His desperation for a son grew, transforming prophecy into obsession. This obsession influenced every major event in his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Advisors fed him cryptic messages, claiming that divine forces opposed the union. Some even whispered that their marriage was cursed because Catherine had been married to Henry's brother Arthur before him. This idea, half legal, half mystical, tormented Henry, to the point that he felt prophecy demanded action. His quest for annulment was not only political or personal, he believed it was spiritually necessary to fulfill destiny. When Boleyn entered his life, Henry saw her as the woman mentioned in several circulating prophecies, a queen with dark hair who would change England forever. These predictions, some genuine and others crafted by Anne's supporters, fueled Henry's conviction that marrying her was the path to securing a future male heir. But Anne's inability to bear a surviving son turned those same prophecies into ominous warnings, shifting court attitudes against her. People whispered that she was the Shadow Queen, a woman whose rise and fall were both foretold. When Henry ordered her execution, he justified it in part through prophecy, insisting that signs had predicted her betrayal. Yet Henry VIII wasn't the only Tudor influenced by his daughter, Mary I, later known as Bloody Mary, was deeply affected by prophecies surrounding her birth. Early predictions claimed she would bring England back to its true faith, a phrase interpreted differently depending on one's beliefs. When Mary attempted to restore Catholicism, she believed she was fulfilling a divine message, but those who opposed her used the same prophecy to paint her actions as dangerous, framing her reign as a dark chapter foretold long ago. Elizabeth I, Henry's second daughter, faced her own tidal wave of prophetic warnings. Courts across Europe circulated visions claiming she would die young, be overthrown, or lose her realm to foreign invaders. Elizabeth dismissed many of these predictions publicly, presenting herself as rational and above superstition. But privately, she was more cautious. She relied heavily on astrologers, particularly Dr. John Dee, whose guidance shaped military strategies, travel decisions, and diplomatic maneuvers. Dee frequently analyzed celestial charts before Elizabeth launched naval expeditions and advised her during moments of political uncertainty. One significant prophecy declared that a virgin ruler shall bring a golden age but walk forever in the shadow of danger. Elizabeth embraced the Virgin Queen image, partly because it aligned with his vision. She turned what was initially a warning into a political brand, using prophecy as a tool of power rather than a threat. Under her rule, England experienced cultural flourishing, exploration, and military victories, especially the defeat of the Spanish Armada, which many believed echoed prophetic promises of divine protection. But prophecy during the Tudor Age wasn't always lofty or mystical. Sometimes it was weaponized. Rebels used predictions to incite uprisings, claiming that a future king from an alternate bloodline would restore order or bring justice. Rival nobles manipulated superstitions to influence the king's decisions or undermine political opponents. Even foreign leaders exploited prophecy, spreading rumors about England's fate to destabilize the monarchy. 5. The Stuart era. Prophecy, paranoia, and the quest for control as the Tudor dynasty faded and the Stuarts ascended the throne. Britain entered an era where prophecy became even more entangled with politics. religion, and the fragile stability of the crown. Unlike the Tudors, who often used prophecy for personal justification, the Stuarts faced a kingdom where visions and omens could spark rebellion, fuel fear, and even justify murder. It was a time when every dream, every comet, and every mysterious prediction was treated as a sign from God or a warning of catastrophe. James I, the first Stuart king of England, arrived with a deep fascination for the supernatural. Long before he inherited Elizabeth I's throne, he had written books about witches, demons, and the unseen forces he believed manipulated human fate. This obsession made him more vulnerable to prophecy than any monarch before him. He believed that the divine right of kings gave him spiritual power, yet he constantly feared hidden threats that prophecies seemed to reveal. One prophecy haunted James from childhood, a prediction that a king from his line would unite the crowns of England and Scotland. When this came true, James believed destiny itself had chosen him. But another vision warned that a great danger would emerge from within his own kingdom. When the gunpowder plot of 1605 unfolded, a Catholic conspiracy to blow up Parliament, James interpreted it as confirmation of that prophecy. From that moment on, he saw omens everywhere. Storms, eclipses, and even strange dreams affected his decisions, causing him to trust certain advisors excessively while suspecting others of treachery. Prophecy, during the Stuart period, became even more politically potent because of the kingdom's religious divisions. Protestants and Catholics each used predictions to justify their beliefs and discredit their enemies. Protestant pamphlets spread warnings of a papist plot destined to overthrow the monarchy, while Catholic prophets claimed that a hidden Catholic king would restore true faith to England. These conflicting visions deepened mistrust across society, affecting the stability of the monarchy itself. When Charles I succeeded his father, prophecy took an even darker turn. Charles was raised in an environment where signs and omens were treated as real warnings, and he carried these fears into his troubled reign. Numerous astrologers predicted that a king would fall during a time of division. As political tension between the crown and Parliament grew, these predictions became rallying cries. Parliament supporters twisted the prophecies to suggest that Charles was the doomed king, while loyalists argued that the warnings referred to rebels who defied the crown. Charles tried to remain rational, but with every failed negotiation and every rising protest, the prophecies weighed heavier on him. Some nights he reportedly woke from nightmares, visions of betrayal, execution, and the collapse of his line. Instead of making him cautious, these fears often pushed him to act rigidly, convinced that compromise would only bring the disastrous fate the prophecies described. When the English Civil War broke out, both sides claimed divine support. Royalist soldiers believed Charles was the chosen defender of God's order, while parliamentarians insisted that prophecy foretold the fall of tyrannical kings. Prophecies circulated in taverns, churches, and battlefields. Even common soldiers looked to omen strange weather, unusual birds in the sky, or unexplainable sounds to predict victory or defeat. The ultimate fulfillment of prophecy came in 1649, when Charles I was executed. Many believed this event had been predicted decades earlier. Some claimed ancient manuscripts warned of a king with a weak chin, referring to Charles's physical features, who would be killed by his own people. Others pointed to astrological charts, claiming a royal bloodline would be cut during a time of cosmic disruption. 4 years after his death, people debated whether Charles had been a victim of prophecy, or whether belief in prophecy had driven him toward choices that sealed his fate. With the monarchy temporarily abolished and England ruled by Oliver Cromwell, prophecy entered a chaotic phase. Extremist religious groups, mystics, and self-declared prophets emerged across the country, each claiming visions of the future. Some predicted Cromwell would become a new king. Others warned he would face divine punishment. When Cromwell died unexpectedly, many interpreted it as the consequence of ignoring prophecy. The restoration of the monarchy in 1660 under Charles II seemed to fulfill new predictions, that a fallen king's son would reclaim the crown and restore order. Charles II embraced prophecy differently than his predecessors. Instead of fearing it, he used it. Knowing the power of symbolism, he encouraged stories portraying him as a king foretold by destiny. He surrounded himself with astrologers, philosophers, and mystics, not because he believed everything they said, but because he understood how prophecy could influence public opinion. However, the greatest prophetic fear of the Stuart age arose during the reign of James II. Widespread predictions warned of a Catholic king who would plunge the kingdom into turmoil. When James converted to Catholicism, many believed these prophecies were coming true. His rule became overshadowed by apocalyptic warnings, and almost every decision he made was interpreted through the lens of destiny. Even the birth of his son was viewed suspiciously, with rumors claiming the child was not truly royal but secretly smuggled into the palace to fulfill an ominous prophecy. 6. The rise of the Hanoverians. Reason versus prophecy. The arrival of the Hanoverian dynasty in the early 18th century marked a dramatic shift in the monarchy's relationship with prophecy. For centuries, British rulers had listened to mystics, feared omens, and allowed visions to influence their decisions. But the Hanoverians rooted in German rationalism and enlightenment. Thinking entered the British throne during a time when society was beginning to value science, logic, and reason over superstition. Yet prophecy did not disappear. It evolved. When George I.S. ascended the throne in 1714, he did so under a cloud of political tension. Many believed the crown rightfully belonged to the exiled Stuarts, and rumors spread that ancient prophecies predicted the downfall of any foreign ruler who dared to sit on the English throne. Jacobites loyalists to the Stuart claimed circulated pamphlets quoting old predictions about the king over the water, who would return to reclaim his destiny. George I dismissed these prophecies publicly, but privately, he monitored them closely. He understood that prophecy had political power, and misinformation could stir rebellion. His decision to limit press freedom and suppress Jacobite pamphlets was not merely politica lit, was an attempt to control the narrative surrounding fate itself. Despite his stern governance, George I faced constant rumors of omens and strange signs. Some claimed that a comet appearing in the sky was a warning for the Hanoverian king. Others insisted that visions foretelling the return of the Stuarts grew stronger each year. Although George tried to bring reason to the throne, the old belief in destiny still shadowed the monarchy. When his son George II took the crown, prophecy took on a new shape. Instead of warnings about the fall of kings, many predictions focused on war and empire. Britain was becoming a global power, and astrologers claimed to foresee victories and defeats written in the stars. Naval officers consulted horoscopes before battles, and merchants believed certain days were luckier for launching ships. George II, though skeptical, paid attention when predictions aligned with political interests. During the War of Austrian Succession, a well-known astrologer claimed the stars favored Britain. George used these predictions to boost morale, demonstrating that while monarchs no longer bowed before prophecy, they still recognized its influence on public opinion. But the most fascinating relationship with prophecy emerged under George III. George III's reign was long, troubled, and marked by profound personal struggles. Though he appeared rational and disciplined, he yielded deep private fear of prophetic warnings. From the beginning of his reign, political opponents spread predictions claiming he would lose the colonies in America. Pamphlets, poems, and even church sermons suggested that fate had already determined the collapse of British rule overseas. When the American Revolution broke out, many saw it as the fulfillment of these visions. Some British generals refused to act decisively, convinced that the war was destined to fail. Others believed that prophecies predicted the rise of a new nation across the Atlantic. The psychological weight of these predictions affected the monarchy more than the public realized. George III tried to dismiss prophecy as nonsense, but as the war dragged on, he grew increasingly troubled. His letters reveal moments of doubt, where he questioned whether the loss of the colonies was a punishment foretold long before his birth. These fears worsened during his periods of illness, when he reportedly spoke of visions and destiny with a sense of desperation. His mental health struggles, often dramatized by the public, became fertile ground for prophecy. Some predicted that the king would be deposed, others that he would die young. Yet George III defied these predictions. He recovered multiple times, guided the nation through wars, and ultimately became a symbol of endurance. The rise of the Prince Regent, the future George IV, introduced a new understanding of prophecy, one tied not to fate, but to image. George IV cared less about omens and more about using prophecy as a form of entertainment and charm. He hosted astrologers, magicians, and mystics at his lavish parties, blending superstition with spectacle. While he did not take predictions seriously, he understood their allure and used them to create an aura of mystique around his court. Meanwhile, the public's interest in prophecy grew stronger. Newspapers published horoscopes, fortune-tellers gained popularity, and the monarchy was often the subject of dramatic predictions. Some warned that George IV would bring ruin. Others claimed a future queen would transform the empire. These prophecies set the stage for one of the greatest monarchs in British history, Queen Victoria. When Victoria was born, several predictions circulated, claiming she would be a powerful, long-reigning queen. Unlike previous rulers, her rise to power seemed to align perfectly with prophecy. Newspapers celebrated her destiny, creating a narrative that she had been chosen to restore stability and glory to the British Empire. VIII's time prophecy had transformed from fear-driven superstition into a tool for public storytelling. Instead of foretelling doom, visions about Victoria painted her as a symbol of hope and strength. The monarchy no longer feared prophecy, they used it to shape national identity. Under the Hanoverians, the role of prophecy shifted dramatically. It lost its grip on royal decision-making, but gained new life as a cultural force. No longer could prophecies topple a king, but they could inspire or frighten the public. They could shape political discourse, fuel rebellion, or elevate a monarch's image. In this era, prophecy became less about destiny and more about perception. It became a story people told to understand their world, a story the monarchy could no longer control, but could still influence. 7. Queen Victoria, the Queen of Fate, and the birth of modern prophecy. Victoria's reign was unlike anything Britain had ever seen. When she ascended the throne in 1837, at just 18 years old, many believed she was fulfilling ancient predictions about a queen who would restore peace, stability, and glory to an empire in transition. Newspapers printed stories about a prophecy foretelling a virgin queen reborn, connecting Victoria to Elizabeth I. Whether these predictions were true or simply part of the public imagination didn't matter. For the first time in centuries, prophecy and monarchy aligned perfectly in the public's mind. Victoria herself, though deeply Christian, was curious about mysticism. Her early life had been filled with strict discipline and isolation, but she developed a quiet fascination with dreams, symbols, and omens. Her journals revealed moments when she wondered if her destiny had been shaped long before her birth. This curiosity only grew as she witnessed the way the public treated her not just as a queen, but as a symbol of fate. The early years of her reign were marked by dramatic political struggles. Governments rose and fell with dizzying speed. The empire expanded rapidly, bringing wealth, but also conflict. Throughout it all, people claimed to see signs and portents connected to their young queen. Some said the empire's growth was written in the stars. Others insisted dark omens warned of upheaval. Victoria, though outwardly calm, paid attention to these stories. She believed that symbols could shape public morale and that prophecy, even when irrational, had power. When she married Prince Albert, a wave of positive prophecies swept across Britain. Fortune-tellers predicted that the union would usher in an age of progress and enlightenment, and remarkably, that's exactly what happened. Albert was fascinated by science, inventions, and modern thinking. Under his influence, the monarchy shifted away from superstition and embraced the future. The Great Exhibition of 1851, massive celebration of innovation, symbolized this new era. Skeptics claimed it was an act of arrogance, defying God's will, but many believed it fulfilled a prophecy of a golden age of industry that would begin under a visionary queen and her prince. When Prince Albert died in 1861, everything changed. Victoria fell into deep mourning, withdrawing from public life. Her grief was overwhelming, and it made her vulnerable to spiritualism, a movement that claimed the living could communicate with the dead. She invited mediums to the palace, hoping desperately to hear Albert's voice one more time. Whether the seances were real or staged, they brought her comfort, but they also ignited controversy. Suddenly, the monarchy was connected to spiritualism. People whispered about seances in the palace and visions seen by the queen's closest attendants. Some said Albert's spirit guided Victoria's decisions. Others believed the queen herself had become prophetic, her intuition sharpened by grief during this period. The public's relationship with prophecy exploded. Britain was changing rapidly. Revolutions swept Europe. Scientific discoveries challenged long-held beliefs, and industrialization reshaped society. People looked for meaning, for signs, for reassurance. Mediums, astrologers, and fortune-tellers became wildly popular, and at the center of it all stood Queen Victoria, a ruler caught between reason and the supernatural. Despite a fascination, Victoria remained practical. She used spiritualism privately, never publicly. She understood that a monarch must appear strong, rational, and steady. But in her letters, she often wrote about dreams that felt like warnings and signs she believed came from Albert. As the empire expanded to its greatest size, many claimed that Britain's rise had been foretold centuries earlier. Prophecies circulated that under a queen named Victoria, the sun would never set on the British Empire. Others predicted that her descendants would rule across continents. Whether truth or myth, these stories reinforced the belief that Victoria's reign was divinely guided. By the late 1800s, prophecy took on a new form, not mystical predictions, but national myth-making. Victoria became more than a queen. She became a symbol of destiny. Her face appeared on maps, statues, coins, and monuments across the world. Children learned stories of her childhood that felt more like legend than history. The monarchy mastered the art of narrative, turning life into myth, and myth into power. Victoria's later years were a blend of tradition and transformation. She accepted scientific progress, but allowed spiritualism to remain in her private life. She encouraged imperial expansion, but worried constantly about omens of rebellion. She celebrated national achievements, but held deep fears of assassination, believing dark forces were always watching. When she died in 1901, after 63 years on the throne, Britain mourned as if an era itself had died. For many, her death marked the end of a prophetic age. People said the skies darkened the day she passed. Others claimed her final words held secrets. Newspapers published predictions that the new century would bring storms and conflict, without the guiding presence of the Queen of Fate. Most importantly, Queen Victoria shaped the monarchy's modern understanding of prophecy. She taught the royal family that prophecy could be a tool not to control fate, but to shape public imagination. She showed that the crown's power rested not only in politics, but in symbols, stories, and the belief that rulers were part of something larger than life. She balanced faith and reason, tradition and progress, creating a monarchy that could survive in a rapidly changing world. Victoria's legacy was not just her empire, it was the myth she became. And in the decades that followed, the monarchy would continue to use prophecy, symbolism, and narrative to protect its influence, ensuring that even in the modern era, the British crown retained an air of mystery, destiny, and unshakable power. Conclusion: the crown that lives beyond time.